Welcome once again to Cinemaholics. From the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm John Negroni, chief editor of Cinemaholics.com, and I also write for The Young Folks, The Spool, and a new outlet as of this week. Abby, Will, I wrote something for Awards Watch.
Hey, congrats.
There it is.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited. Maybe we'll talk about it a little bit more later. But first, from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he is a pop culture writer for Cinema Blend, and he also writes for Cinemaholics. It's Will Ashton.
Hello, hello.
From Kansas City, Missouri, she is a freelance writer and film editor for The Pitch magazine. Her bylines include RogerEbert.com, Slash Film, Crooked Marquee, and the brick wall behind the school that is filled with movie-related graffiti. It's Abby Olchesi.
Hello.
Sorry, I just accused you of vandalism.
I've been accused of worse, so don't worry about it.
You can find more episodes of Cinemaholics, including our full archive on cinemaholics.com, including written reviews and other bonus content. You can write into the show anytime by emailing us. Our email, as always, is cinemaholicspodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from you all. And if you'd like to support this podcast and help us keep the fun going, please head on over to patreon.com/cinemaholics. We also have Cinemaholics merch you can purchase on our website, cinemaholics.com. So go get yourself a hoodie, a mug, a t-shirt, or maybe even a shot glass. Links to everything I just mentioned are in the show notes per usual. So for off topics, gotta kick things off with a declaration that the gang is back together after I feels like it's been a month since all three of us were in the same podcasting room.
It's true. It's been a while because I think you guys were both at Sundance. And so I hosted with Kimber. And then I was unable to be with both of you, I think the week before that and also the week after that. So yeah, it's been like 3 weeks and we're finally back together. It's exciting.
It's very exciting. It's like a whirlwind of changes, in 2021, but we're kind of Abby, I'm upset a little bit because for two things. Last week, we forgot to announce that it was our season 5 premiere. Our 5th year Cinemaholics begins. We forgot to say that, but I think subconsciously it's because it didn't feel right saying it until you were here.
Ah, shucks.
So, welcome to season 5 of Cinemaholics, everybody.
Yeah.
And I think this is the first official week. Let's say that. But yeah, glad you're all here, and I hope you're all doing all right. We have too many films to get to. We were kind of we had conversations about what to actually review this weekend because I think something like 13 movies came out Valentine's Day weekend. We're recording this on Valentine's Day. So congrats, by the way. We're each other's Valentines, at least in the podcasting world. But yeah, I don't know. Do any of you have theories for why everything just dropped out of nowhere like this?
I don't know. I think part of it might be, it might be the fact that it's Valentine's Day weekend and that people normally would want to go out. And this time last year, we were still able to go out. So I don't know. I think in the case of at least one of the movies that we're going to talk about later on, it's, I think, great timing because it's such a bummer of a time of year being stuck inside. And for most of the country, myself included, it's sub-zero temperatures and you can't leave your house even if you wanted to. So maybe they were planning it, maybe not, but I feel like it's ended up being a good thing either way.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's primarily Valentine's Day weekend because a lot of the movies that we got are fairly romantic or at least have some sort of romance involved with them. But I also think it's because it's a 4-day weekend for some people because of President's Day on Monday. So
that's right, yeah.
I think that's also part of it. I'm not 100% sure, but that would be my guess at least. Otherwise, I don't exactly know, but here we are.
It's clear to me that Hollywood created this snowstorm that even Seattle is snowed in just because they wanted us to watch a bunch of movies, which, if that's the case, I'm fine with that. I love watching movies, actually. Although in the Bay Area, no snow for us as usual. We're just sort of staying home because we do that anyway. But yeah, some of the films that are out this weekend that we're not talking about until next week include Minari. We want to talk about Minari, but obviously that's a big release. That said, there were so many other things. We decided we should probably save that for next week, make sure it gets its due. Another film we're going to put off until next week is Land, the Robin Wright directed film, her directorial debut on film. And there's just a few other films that they're just not going to make the cut. There's a couple that came out like a few weeks ago that like we thought about maybe covering. The Dig, which came out on Netflix, kind of a lovely Carey Mulligan, Ray Fine movie that I kind of enjoyed. I wanted to talk about it, but it's just we just have so much to get to. There's also Bliss, which I think all three of us saw, the Owen Wilson, Salma Hayek movie that I don't think any of us enjoy. Is that fair to say?
I definitely didn't. It was, yeah, you can read my review of it, full review on Crooked Marquee, but I gave it a pretty bad review.
I did too for the spool. I think I said that like I like the script was something like the first draft of an essay from like a college sophomore or something like that.
That's exactly what it felt like.
What about you, Will? I feel we've talked about Bliss, but I feel like you haven't said too many negative things about it. Is that because you appreciate it maybe to some degree? Am I reading into that?
I don't think so. I mean, I was not too far off from where you are, at least. Yeah, I mean, I just ultimately found it to be fairly disappointing. But I think because I delayed it, like I didn't finish it until yesterday, I kept like putting it off because I was like, maybe it's going to get good. Because there's certain points of it where I'm like, okay, this is kind of intriguing. Like that's a direction I wasn't fully anticipating. It was like, okay, maybe I'm just not giving this the full credit yet. Like I think I wanted to reserve my criticisms until I saw the whole thing, and then I did, and I'm like, yep, that was basically what I thought it was going to be, which is unfortunate. But the cameos were fun in it. I didn't realize until after I read your review that it was supposed to be a romance. I guess that speaks to the lack of chemistry between Owen Wilson and Salma Hayek in it. But
yeah, it's pretty bad. Yeah, so I guess it's pretty safe to say we didn't care for it. We're not really going to have much of a review for it. There was one thing that we did come out with a bonus review of. You might have caught it on your feed, but Crime Scene: The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel came out on Netflix, and that was kind of a surprise Netflix hit. It's like a 4-part docu-series from Joe Berlinger. And it was kind of impromptu, but I got to set up a wonderful podcast discussion with Chris Wagner, freelance writer for New York Times, LA Times, a bunch of other places. And so we talked about that. And yeah, it just feels like this week, so many things kept coming out. I was watching things like every single day, and I still feel like I'm not even close to like seeing everything this week had to offer. But that's probably for the best. We gotta draw the line somewhere. But that said, we did a voicemail question last week. Abby, you missed it, so we wanted to do a part 2. We asked the listeners, do you still watch movie trailers? We played 2 voicemails last week, so we're going to play another one this week. But first, I want to hear from you. Abby Chesty, the conversation last week was basically like, in the era of COVID, like I was kind of talking about how I don't see a need to watch movie trailers. Like mainly because we do this show, like I'm not stuck in a theater where like I'm forced to sit through trailers. And I feel like I've gotten used to it. Like it's felt kind of nice to not be watching the same trailers over and over again, because like more movies are becoming more surprising to me. And I've been going out of my way to not really look into movies before seeing them, getting that sort of like festival surprise on a pretty regular basis. But that was kind of my take on it. And Will, you kind of had something similar to say about it. Not that we dislike trailers, but like, what do you think, Abby? I want to hear from you, and then we'll hear from a listener of the show.
Yeah. That's a good question. I feel like I still watch trailers pretty regularly, at least because it helps me kind of determine pretty quickly whether or not it's a thing that I want to review. Like if I'm going into like assignment time for an outlet and they ask you which movie do you want to review, usually it helps give me some context to watch that stuff. I don't actively seek them out though, as much as I used to pre-COVID. I think I actually did enjoy watching trailers in the theaters, even if they were for the same thing over and over again, just because there was the possibility that something might surprise you, like that you didn't realize was coming out. But these days, it just feels like it's kind of become part of the, like, I'm more likely to read about a new release probably than I am to actually watch the trailer.
Yeah, I feel like I'm basically in the same boat. We played voicemails last week that were kind of like saying the thing that a lot of us have talked about, where it just feels like trailers are total recaps of the films themselves. And it's like, I already know I'm going to watch these films. I especially try to avoid, I don't think I mentioned this last week, but I try to avoid the second trailer more than anything else. Because like the first trailer, it's usually like not quite a teaser, but it's pretty good about not revealing too many things, Whereas like trailer 2 tends to be the, okay, this one has got to like get people to watch. I think a good example is I didn't watch trailer 2 for Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar, so I don't know how the trailer 2 for that worked. But the first trailer for that movie, I think, is like what all trailers should be like, because it gives nothing away. It doesn't even show their faces, but it definitely like gets you interested in like what that movie is going to be. And I know we're going to talk about Barb and Star in a moment, but I think that is the way to do trailers, I think, especially for a movie like that.
I think in theory it is, but I don't think the trailer for that movie really sells it. Because I remember my vivid memory of the trailer for Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar was seeing it on Christmas Day for Rise of Skywalker. And the reaction was just 2.5 minutes of dead silence. Like nobody was like angry or like outspoken about how they felt. They just were just like, all right, well, that's a thing. And now we're moving on to the next trailer. So I don't think I really like sold the movie from what I can tell, because I've talked to people about it and they're always kind of like, I don't know, like that trailer didn't really get me invested. But I agree, like from a conceptual standpoint, that I'd much rather have a trailer like that doesn't tell you much of anything about the film than something that gives away.
Yeah, or give away the jokes, right? Because usually trailers have like the best jokes in the movie, like in the trailer, and that is not the case for Barb and Star. I don't think it had hardly any of the really good jokes in there.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm curious to talk more about the marketing for this when we get to the full review, because I understand why they withhold so much in both trailer 1 and trailer 2. But also, I think I agree with Will in that neither of them really get you that excited to watch the movie. I think there's like maybe one element that made me think that it could potentially be really fun, but it was fairly small. So we'll talk about that in a bit.
Interesting. Okay. The interesting opinions coming at us then. Okay, so we're going to play this voicemail from one of our listeners, Taylor, who sent us a voicemail before. Here's what Taylor had to say about watching movie trailers.
I think that when I was going to the movies once or twice a week, I definitely had a desire to seek out movie trailers a lot more. I would always make sure that I got to the theater in time just to watch the trailers. I found them to be exciting, and on the big screen, you know, it's the first sort of taste you get of some of these larger than life films that come out. And I felt that over the last year, I've watched a lot less, sort of like you. And I think that part of that is because I've always sort of related trailers and the movie going experience with one another. I was never really keen on ever watching it on like a small phone screen. But also, I just think the movies from this past year have been pretty bad, like generally. Found very few that have changed my mind. And that's not to say that there aren't more. I'm sure that there are. But with everything that just went on last year and how a lot of stuff just sort of halted to a stop, I just was really underwhelmed, you know, and I think that that sort of carried over into the lack of trailers or into the quality of the trailers. I just thought it was a pretty poor year for films. So, you know, I'm not going to hate on anybody for that. I mean, it was pretty obvious why things developed the way that they did. But I watched the Godzilla trailer the other day, and the very first thing that came to my head was, God, I wish I saw this on a big screen. And until I have that back in my life, movie trailers just don't hit the same.
All right. So thank you, Taylor, for responding. And yeah, I mean, a little bit of a hot take, because I know I don't agree that the year film was terrible. I know Taylor has talked with us before. I know he's seen a lot of good stuff. He just didn't like as many things compared to what we did. But it is interesting to like bring up the Godzilla versus Kong trailer, which I went out of my way not to watch. Mainly because, yeah, I guess it's the kind of thing that like, if I'm not going to see the trailer on a big screen right before a movie, I guess I don't, you know, we did talk about this last week a little bit too, where like there's that whole cottage industry around like trailer reactions online. And I'm just not like into it, honestly, but I don't know. What do you think, Abby? What's your take?
I'm not in agreement either that last year was bad for film. I think there were quite a few that I liked a lot, but I mean that, you know, mileage may vary depending on how you feel about some of the movies that we liked so much. I did watch the Godzilla versus Kong trailer mostly because most of film Twitter was reacting to it, and I felt like I would be out of the loop if I didn't. But it was good. But yeah, I agree that I would have preferred to see that on a big screen. I think that's going to go for the movie too. Obviously, that's the kind of thing that's going to play best on like the largest screen you can possibly handle. So there is, I think, a certain amount of, it's a mixed bag of feelings, because you're excited that you're going to get it at all, and that it's not like this carrot that's being like perpetually moved down the line. But the other side of that is that, like, you're probably not going to get to see it in the theater, and it would be a lot more fun if you could safely. So all that is to say, if you really are that excited about watching Godzilla versus Kong in a theater, maybe rent it out. It's not that expensive, actually. You can probably get a group of friends to safely distance within an auditorium and see it yourself. So there are ways around it. Yeah. It's just a little unorthodox.
Here's hoping that, by the time my birthday comes around in like October of this year, going to be able to do that, like rent out a theater, and maybe like COVID won't even be like bad enough anymore that we have to do stuff like that. Who knows? But okay, Will Ashton, we'll give you the last word on this. Anything else you want to address before we leave this topic behind us and we go back to our movie review show?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about the Godzilla vs. Kong trailer, is it Godzilla vs. Kong or Kong vs. Godzilla? I keep getting them mixed up.
I think it's Godzilla vs. Kong.
Godzilla vs.
They know the money shot. They know the brand.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like when I saw the trailer, I had a similar reaction. I was just like, I need to see this on the big screen. I'm trying to figure out how I can do that. Like Abby said, like I don't know if I have to like rent a theater or if I have to go to the drive-in or something. But it's like I'm not watching this at home. Like I just, this is not a movie that's meant to be seen like on my TV. Like if I can figure out a way to safely see this on a big screen, I'm going to pursue it. But at this point, yeah, it's just like I think I would have actually been okay if that one got delayed, because I was like, if it meant seeing it later down the line in a way that I don't have to think about these things, I think I would have preferred that as opposed to having earlier access to it. But I do agree that was one of the few trailers I've seen recently where it got me juiced up again, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is like what it felt like to go to the movies and to see something like this that's like blaring out the speakers and just being a full like auditorium experience. And to experience that at home and knowing I'm not going to probably see the trailer on the big screen anytime soon is pretty disheartening, but that's the way things are right now, and that's how they're going to be for at least a little bit. So I got to get used to it.
But hey, wait, what about the Zack Snyder trailer? Did you have that? Okay, no, we're not going to talk about that.
We live in a society, John.
Yeah, I saw that part. Yeah, that's
I haven't seen it, so I don't know. I'm telling you, I don't watch these things.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe one of our next voicemail questions will be about director's cuts. That could be fun. But okay, that'll do it for Off Topics. Let's move into our first review of the week. Let's talk about Judas and the Black Messiah.
I want to share something with you. Like the masses, I was in awe when I first laid eyes on all the things you are. I heard that speech. I knew we'd make noise. I just thought it'd be in the streets.
The Black Panthers are the single greatest threat to our national security. Our counterintelligence program must prevent the rise of a Black Messiah.
You're looking at 18 months for the stolen car, 5 years for impersonating a federal officer, or you can go home.
What do you want?
Get close to Hampton.
The Black Panthers are forming a rainbow coalition of oppressed brothers and sisters of every color.
Neutralize him by any means necessary.
America's on fire right now. And until that fire is extinguished, nothing else means a damn thing. Imagine what we could accomplish together. We can heal this whole city.
You ain't tell me it was gonna be like this. These ain't no terrorists.
We got a rat, man.
Does anybody else know about me?
No one knows your identity.
Are you sure?
We educate, we nurture, we feed, and we lobby. Perhaps we're here for more than just war with these bodies. We scream, and we shout, and we live by this anthem. But it's power to the people really worth their ransom.
When I dedicated my life to people, I dedicated my life.
You get to go out there, talk about dying a revolutionary death, because you don't have another person growing inside your body.
Anywhere there's people, there's power.
Judas and the Black Messiah is a new biographical drama. I think it counts as that. It's a two-hander, though. We're looking at two very important lives in the Black Panther Party movement from the late 1960s. This film is directed by Shaka King. Screenplay is from Will Burson, and Shaka King co-wrote it. And it stars Daniel Kaluuya as Fred Hampton, who was the Chicago chairman of the Black Panthers back in, it was the late 60s. I forget how many years he was their chairman, but the film itself takes place over the course of like 1968, 1969. And it goes over Fred Hampton's rise in infamy in that part of Chicago, in this political movement where the civil rights era has just seen the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And the Black Panthers are a very avant-garde, politically polarized group that is actually seeing a lot of success. They're unifying people, specifically with Fred Hampton in Chicago, bringing people together who you wouldn't expect to come together. This is based on true events, but the film is also, and arguably mainly, about the downfall of Fred Hampton because of the Judas in this scenario. The Judas being a man named William O'Neill, played here by Lakeith Stanfield. In order to avoid jail time for impersonating a federal officer, an FBI agent played by Jesse Plemons actually recruits Lakeith Stanfield, and he offers him a deal. He says, if you infiltrate the Black Panthers, feed us information, and ostensibly take down the Black Panthers from within, he doesn't have to go to jail for, I think it's something like 5 years. And from there, the film goes over his infiltration into this group, how he becomes one of their leaders, earns Fred Hampton's trust, and then all of the chaos that comes out of that. This is a huge, incredible cast. We also have Dominique Fishback as Deborah Johnson, who is a love interest, a girlfriend of Fred Hampton. We kind of see how they meet up for the first time. We also have Martin Sheen in, it's kind of mean, but it's kind of clown makeup. He's playing J. Edgar Hoover in one of the more one-dimensional roles, honestly. And it's a lot of other people. We'll probably talk about the cast as we go, but we really get a glimpse, like an intimate glimpse of Chicago at this time. This film has been getting a lot of awards attention. It premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. It's eligible, I think, for some awards. I forget if it is going to be able to get anything for Academy Awards. I know for Sundance it didn't qualify for anything because it was too late of an edition. That said, this is looking like it's going to be one of the buzziest, critics-friendly films of the year. So what did we think about it? Starting with you, Abigail Chessie. Judas and the Black Messiah. How long ago did you see this? And I have no idea what you think of it yet.
Yeah, I actually just got to see it on release on Friday, basically. I had some opportunities to try and see it before release, but it just schedule-wise didn't work out. But I was happy I got to see this. I'm happy I got to see this on release. It's a really good movie. I feel like we're kind of building a like Chicago 1968 cinematic universe with this one, because we had Trial of the Chicago 7 come out last year, and Fred Hampton's death obviously is part of that film, and this film also alludes to the ongoing trial. It like refers to Bobby Seale at one point, so like obviously those are things happening in tandem. So I wouldn't be adverse to more movies exploring that particular period in history. As a former Chicagoan myself, I love getting to get some context into a city where I used to live. I also enjoyed watching this. I can recommend a couple of things. I mean, one is Trial of the Chicago 7, which for some of the things that it doesn't do well, there are some things that it does very well, and that's worth checking out. The other is a documentary that came out a few years ago called The Black Panthers Vanguard of the Revolution, which aired on PBS, I think around like 2014. Yeah, it's really good. And that was, I think,
it was like 2015, I think.
Yeah. That was the first time that I had ever heard, I think, of Fred Hampton really in any larger context. And actually really the first time that I was exposed to like the reality of the Black Panther movement. As is I think also the case with a lot of white kids who grew up in smaller towns and had white people teaching their history classes, the perspective that we got on the Black Panthers was pretty slanted and pretty limited. And so it's always great to see pieces of art dramatic, documentary or otherwise, that really give them more context and show these people as like the well-intentioned and multifaceted revolutionaries that they were, instead of just people to be feared. And there was a lot that I learned in this movie too that I hadn't known about previously. I hadn't known about Bill O'Neill. I did know about the shootout, but I hadn't known about the events leading up to that. I didn't know about the whole Rainbow Coalition and how really incredibly impressive that was. We see Fred Hampton in the movie working with like area, like actual, like with gangs, with like Black groups, Puerto Rican groups, a group of white supremacist leftists that he manages to kind of call over to the Black Panther cause by appealing
to Young Patriots, I think they were called.
The Young Patriots, by appealing to like their common experience of oppression at the hands of the police and the system, which is fascinating. And particularly right now, a fascinating thing to consider. I think I did look up the Young Patriots group, and they were more left-leaning than some of the groups that are currently in existence. But I think the idea of that is a really interesting one to present, like right now. And there's a lot going on in this movie that I think is interesting. There's also like the fact that in the title itself, Judas and the Black Messiah, there are a lot of elements within the movie that lend themselves to that kind of biblical Messiah narrative that we can probably get into in a little bit, that I also really appreciated. Sorry, I'm kind of long-winded on this one, but I liked it a lot.
No, I really want to talk about that, because that's I think like that angle of it is really fascinating. The political angle is like endlessly fascinating to me, because there's a lot of conversation about how politics has shifted since the 1960s, and like nowadays it's considered like very right leaning to be libertarian for some reason, where like libertarian philosophy goes back to like mainly Marx. Like it's really complicated, and there's a lot of nuance to it. And I think sometimes we do get that like one-dimensional take from our history books, particularly about the Black Panthers, because similar to you, we're sort of taught the Black Panthers were basically like terrorists, and the same way people are taught that like BLM is like a terrorist group. And there's a lot of like mania around civil rights whenever these things bottle up. This movie is kind of about how power systems set themselves up and create ways to bring these groups down because they fear them, and they fear them for reasons that this movie actually makes kind of clear, I think, and succeeds in displaying like why the FBI would want to go to such great lengths to essentially sanction some like atrocity. Now, we won't give away exactly what happens, of course, but it is history. A lot of you listening probably already know what happened. I didn't know the specifics, though. Particularly something that happens toward the end of the film is really, really closely aligned with what actually went down. And I appreciate the attention to detail in this film. It takes a lot of creative liberties, but in ways, particularly with Lakeith Stanfield's performance and how he like handles this conflicted guy who, history kind of says wasn't as conflicted, or kind of gives a different impression of that. This film offers a bit of an alternative take that I think is interesting. But Will, you saw this as well at Sundance. I know that you definitely were like championing it during the festival, but it's been a little while since we both saw it. So what do you think looking back, and do you think highly of this one?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I still think very highly of the film. I think, like I said back when I saw it, that this is kind of a miracle that this movie exists, at least from the studio standpoint. Like, we're talking about the same studio that only like 10 years prior released J. Edgar from the Clint Eastwood movie. And just like the fact that we have a movie like this that is so openly damning of the FBI and the systems like that, that it allows itself to be so angry and so forthright with what it's trying to say, without holding itself back, without feeling the need to hold itself back. I think that's pretty fascinating in and of itself. But I also think, like you two are saying, that the movie itself, just on its own terms, just works really, really well. From a directing standpoint especially, but also from our two lead performers. And that's not to short sight the other performances. Like we said, Dominique Fishback and Jesse Plemons, I think, are also very good in this. And I really like what they're able to do in their supporting roles. I do agree. I think Martin Sheen, I think he does the best what he's able to do, but he does have that like penguin makeup throughout, which is pretty distracting because, like you said,
it's
John,
unfortunate.
This movie, it takes so many efforts to be as truthful as possible without sacrificing a lot of the entertainment value, which is, I think, pretty impressive as well. But yeah, just like, I think his performance, he does the best he can, but there is like this kind of cartoonishness to it that's unfortunate, because not only is it out of line with the rest of the film, but it does kind of rob it of some of its authenticity. It is a bit of a one note character in this film, which I think is fine. Like, it serves its purpose, but at the same time, I think the fact that it is going against everything that the movie is doing well, that's unfortunate. But I mean, I think by and large, that criticism is pretty minor in the scheme of things, because like I said, I think everything that's working with the film is working really well, and I think it's complementing one another. If anything, I think that the movie is ultimately a bit short-sighted, because it's only, I think, like 126 minutes. And it goes really fast, but it does feel like they have to kind of gloss over some things, or kind of have to address things openly without really diving into them, because there's so much to unpack with this story that I think they could only really kind of get to the core aesthetics of it, which is fine, because it's, it's like like you said, like a two handler. It's two life stories told at the same time, and it's kind of hard to do that in full detail, even at about 130 minutes altogether. But like I said, I think what works here really does work. I think it's a well-packed movie, and I definitely got a lot out of it. And like I said, I'm just glad that it came from the studio system and it got as big of a budget as it did. And I'm really excited to see where Shaka King goes from here, because this is a really impressive sophomore film. I believe it's sophomore. I forget if Newlyweds was his first film or a sophomore film, but nevertheless, definitely has a great future ahead of him. And I'm really excited to see where he goes from here.
I think you're right. I think this is the sophomore film, but could be wrong about that. Regardless, yeah, this is a huge high-profile release for him, and clearly, a bright future ahead. I was going to say too, I think you touch on something that I was also feeling as well, which is that they do have a lot of other stories here that kind of fall to the wayside at points. I think like Jermaine Fowler, for example, has this kind of role that I feel like would have been a lot more affecting if we had been able to really like see a little bit more of that guy and get a little bit more of his story. I think like Dominique Thorne, keep your eye out for her, because she gets like two really crucial scenes in this movie, and they're both very heightened. One of them is like this very tense like interrogation scene that I was like, no wonder she's playing Ironheart in the Marvel movies, because she is going to like absolutely nail it. But then also this shootout that she gets to be part of, where like she just kind of like dominates the screen despite not really having a ton of dialogue. She just does it all through performance. Similarly, like Dominique Fishback, who does have a good amount of dialogue, she is kind of in that trope a little bit of like the concerned girlfriend, and I think that like the movie kind of like wavers on how successfully it handles it, because she is somebody who like spars with Fred Hampton, really like is his foil in a good way, and it does a lot to establish like their love story and everything. But I don't know, I think this movie is so focused on Fred Hampton and Bill O'Neill. I kind of wonder, like, would it have been a even better ensemble, or is it a good balance as it is? I'm not sure, actually.
Yeah, I'd say I think it works best at like looking at that dynamic between the two of them. I do think that there are a lot of side plots here, and a lot of those I think they're important to telling the story of the Black Panthers and that struggle. But you're right, they do kind of get shifted to the side a little bit, to the point where there are a few like really dramatic things that happen late in the film, and it can be a little tough to remind yourself who these people are specifically. But it's still, I mean, it still has a lot of impact. I will also say that I feel like we didn't get, I mean, for as much as the focus is on Lakeith Stanfield's performances as Bill O'Neill for like a good chunk of the movie, we don't know that much about him apart from just like the basics that we're given, like his criminal background and the way that he interacts with Jesse Plemons. But we do get a lot more of Fred Hampton's background, which makes sense. But there were a couple points in the movie where I thought, if we're getting this much focus on the person who is going to be betrayed, I would like to know just as much about the person who is going to betray him, like a little more emotionally, and something that kind of backs up the stuff that we get to see.
Yeah, I mean, that's a criticism I had when I saw the film, and thinking back on it, I think because the movie is trying to be sticking to the truth as much as possible, I think William O'Neill, from what I can tell, was kind of a reserved guy, and that we don't, like, there's like a lot of things I think they didn't want to assume or like kind of put in there to like speculate too much. So I had that similar criticism, but I'm kind of willing to forgive that, I think, for that reason. But I wasn't sure if that was something you two felt about that.
I'm in the same place, actually. I because I thought that too, but I was like, well, if they did reveal too much, it almost would feel like they're manufacturing sympathy for this guy, where I don't think it probably factually exists, and I think could actually be a bit offensive to, what his deal was. And I think there's actually something kind of scarier about like a person who's really just doing this, not because, his upbringing was like particularly challenging, which you could frame in a way to make him more sympathetic, but really because he was just looking out for himself. And he decided that his own interests were more important. And to me, I think like the way the film plays out and what you see of him toward the end of the film, I think is all the more resonant, even though it's conflicting, because I do also feel that like I do want to understand this person more. I do want to like wrap my head around in the fact that it is frustrating, but I wonder for me if that's like a good thing almost.
Yeah, and I think you're probably both right in that. I part of my desire for that, I think, comes from some of the more biblical narrative type stuff that we get toward the end of the movie. So like there are a couple of scenes where right leading up to the shootout where Hampton is killed. There is a scene that's basically the Last Supper. Like it is framed that way, and Bill O'Neill's behavior in that scene is framed that way, and his interaction with Jesse Plemons right before that, and I think also right after that, is also super dramatic and also feels very very much in parallel with what we know of the character of Judas in the Bible. And I don't know, I find as a Christian, I find that narrative to be really powerful and interesting and full of potential nuance. And so when I see something like that presented in dramatic form, even if it's just like an analog, for whatever reason, like I want that psychology. But historically, I absolutely understand why it like that's a tough line to walk when you're dealing with actual characters and you're dealing with stakes that involve people that are, that are still alive and legacies that are still kind of playing out and that are important to maintain. So that's, I think, given the constraints that they had to work within, I still think it works really well.
Yeah, like there is a scene in this movie where you see how the FBI agents really just disregard these people, and they really just like look down on them. And it's a lot about how like history like glosses over a lot of the Christianity behind people like the Black Panthers, but because they were like outspoken socialists, there is this like binary like socialism is anti-Christian thing, even though like these people were grounded in a lot of like biblical like ethos that I think to this day people have a lot of debates about the line between like what capitalism means in a Judeo-Christian society. And like I think that like having the Black Panthers challenge this is what kind of like it does kind of like mirror the story of Jesus and like all of that that specific crucifixion that he went through because of his like challenge to the system or his like upending of the system. And I think it's incredible that a film is this bold that it's going to draw that comparison. And I guess the most surprising thing to me is that like something like this is coming out, and I wonder like kind of this was alluded to earlier, but like this has come out like 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Can you imagine like how many people would have found it so offensive and sacrilegious, but now today are sort of like, like there's a little bit more. I don't know if that's more of a me thing. Maybe people are like upset about this movie. I just think it's a matter of like people don't know yet because the film hasn't really hit like as mainstream an audience. I'm not sure which that is, but like I could absolutely see people finding the comparisons to be totally offensive to them because they definitely don't see like Black Panthers, anywhere close to this kind of morality or this sort of like biblical interpretation. But I don't know if I'm reading into that, to be honest.
Well, that's what I was trying to get at before, is that I just don't think like I said before, like I don't think 10 years ago this movie would have been made, at least not from Warner Brothers. Like I just don't think there is even a conversation that they would have had where they considered this as they did. And I think one thing that is worth mentioning is that I do think Ryan Coogler is fundamental to this movie coming out and having as big of a budget as it does. Like I have to assume
he's a producer.
As a producer, that he was fundamental to the movie having a fairly sizable budget and able to tell a story on this scale. And I think that's commendable. I don't know that for sure, but I have to assume with his clout, coming off of, Creed and Black Panther, that has to be the case. But I mean, I don't even know if like 5 years ago, the story would have been made from Warner Brothers. So, I mean, the fact that it is coming out, it's on the scale, and in our opinion, it's as good as it is, I think is really commendable.
I agree completely. Let's get that into our final thoughts then. Will, why don't you wrap that up from there then? What's your final thought on this and your grade for Judas and the Black Messiah?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think by and large, I just think this is a really well-made film. If anything, I just kind of wish it was able to do more and have a little bit more time to tell its story. But I think as a compact 130-minute film, it does a lot, and it does a lot really well. And I think, like we said, Shaka King is really an outstanding director, especially if this is only his second film. I'm really impressed to see where he goes. I'm hoping he makes more movies in this vein. Like, I'm worried that he's going to be sucked up and forced to make some like superhero movie, which I don't think he'll do a bad job or anything, but I'd much rather see personal stories like this told at a mid-budget like this, because these are becoming more and more rare from the studio system. And if we can get more movies like this, I'm really hoping that's the case. But yeah, I mean, the only thing I think we haven't really mentioned I thought might have been interesting is that I've heard some criticisms made that because Daniel Kaluuya and Lakeith Stanfield, I think they're like both about 30, and the subject they play are about 10 years younger than that. I can see the criticism there. I don't really have as much of a issue with that, because I think, like we're saying, like I think that's going for like the kind of Jesus metaphor there, because I think Jesus was about like 33, 34 when he died, and I think Dan Kaluuya is about that age. So I mean, I think that might be intentional. It just might be me reading too much into it based on our conversation, but I do wonder.
I think it just came down to they were the right actors for it, and they look young enough.
Yeah.
Because I know they were looking at Jaden Smith for this role.
Oh, were they? I did not know that. But I do wonder too, like if it would have been even more hard hitting if it was like someone that was like 20 or 21, the same age that Fred Hampton was when he passed away. But yeah, I mean, like I said, by and large, I think my criticisms are fairly minor compared to what I think really does work well, and the fact that I'm glad that a movie like this has been made and made on the scale and made as well as it is. And yeah, I mean, I really do hope that it gets some major award consideration, because I think it's well deserved. But we'll have to find that out in, I guess, a month or two. So I'm a pretty firm and positive A- on this film.
All right, yeah, I'm a firm A- as well, and I think it's everything we've touched on. I think the performances here are the reason to watch this film. You know, there's nothing about it I think that's like cinematically innovative. Like, there wasn't really any part of the film that I found particularly like creative, or like, it's not like they executed the film in a way that was really, in your face, I guess. But everything it does, I think, is like really, really competent, really well done, very entertaining and gripping. It keeps, it's the kind of film where you're thinking more about the performances and the writing than you are things like cinematography and action directing, anything like that. Although I do think that like the things that they do with like it's the few action scenes and the specific scene toward the end that we've talked about is all like pulled off to like such incredible precision. I think that's probably the most impressive thing about it on a technical aspect. And also just, I think the world building here is what really works. Like, you really feel like you are in this place, that you understand this part of Chicago and what it's going through in a pretty well-rounded way. I think, Abby, you spoke to how like those subplots do add a lot of context. They do like round out this world in a way that makes the main story here all the more effective. So yeah, I'm a firm A- on it as well, and I'm glad. I think this in terms of Daniel Kaluuya being cast, I think that this was a situation of like, yeah, he doesn't look 2021, but who cares, because he's so good at this role, so we got to give it to him. That's my take. But we'll finish with you, Abby Olchesi. What's your final thought and grade?
I think we might have a clean sweep of A- here. I think I'm in the same spot that you two are. I like this a lot. There are some things that I wish could be a little bit different, maybe, but I recognize completely that given the stuff like budget and historical considerations and length that they had to work with, I think everything works about as well as you could possibly expect it to be. I think the two central performances are great. Daniel Kaluuya is like, he's got this energy that he brings to this role that is exactly what you want when you're like making a movie about, I think, a revolutionary leader. He really commands the room, and Lakeith Stanfield makes a great Weasel. He's very good at the role that he's been given, and actually looks a little like the real Bill O'Neill as well, like enough to where it's like the actual clips that you see of him being interviewed feel sort of seamless. But yeah, I think a lot of it works really well. I agree that with you, John, that it is mostly, I think, a performance and writing based movie, and those are both really, really solid. And the technical elements, I think, are pulled off to a really good degree. You'll learn stuff. There's action in it. And there's a lot of good dramatic push and pull between the two lead characters. So yeah, A- from me.
All right. I think it's pretty easy to average out the grades for this one. So yeah, Judas and the Black Messiah, pretty easy recommendation from the three of us. You should definitely check it out. It is on HBO Max simultaneously with a theatrical release. I do think that it's only on HBO Max for 30 days, so you don't have a ton of time beyond that to see this one streaming. But if you can safely see this in a movie theater and do so without putting yourself or anybody else in harm's way, then please consider doing that. Okay, let's move on to our next film. And this one, I when I first saw To All the Boys I've Loved Before, who thought this was going to be a trilogy, Like maybe people who had read the book, and I don't know if the book even has like sequels, do they?
It does, yeah. I have to assume that Netflix was thinking about this in terms of trilogy. Like I think everything they do, they're thinking, could this be a trilogy? So I'm not surprised in the least that this became a trilogy. But nevertheless, considering how small scale the story is, it is impressive that this is a trilogy. But I'll let you speak more to that now.
That's the thing, isn't it? It's like you finish the first movie, and like Abby, you've only seen the first film, so it's just Will and I talking about this one, and like. You have to be wondering to yourself, well, what else is there? Like, where does the story go from here by the end of the first? We can lightly spoil the first film. It's mainly about a young woman played by Lana Condor. Her character is Lara Jean, and she has written these love letters to her crushes over the years. They all get sent out by her precocious little sister, and then things happen, and she gets into this like fake relationship with Noah Centineo's character, Peter Kavinsky, and I mean, come on, you know what the deal is, that they're going to, their fake relationship is maybe going to turn into a real one, isn't it?
What?
So, yeah.
I watched Bridgerton. I know how this works.
There you go. Yeah, Bridgerton be like, the formula must continue. But yeah, Abby, you saw just the first one. What was your take on that film?
I liked the first one fine. I thought it was cute. I am not against seeing numbers 2 and 3. I know they've gotten a pretty warm reception from fans and critics alike. I wouldn't call myself a rabid To All the Boys fan, but I appreciate it. I think it's nice to have cute, fun, romantic things to watch on Netflix when you're feeling that way.
Yeah, that was my, like, when I first saw the first one. We were at a different time in 2018. We were coming off of like a rom-com drought. Not that there weren't rom-coms, but they just didn't have that. We were just starting to get the more like cozy rom-coms that are still kind of artistically interesting to some degree. They're just a notch above like the Hallmark Channel kind of thing that just feels aggressively safe, like insultingly safe. And I like that first one a lot. I think it's the best of the trilogy, just because it's the most complete standalone film, and I think that gives it a lot of merit. The second film I thought was definitely a downgrade. I was like a B- on it, like not bad or anything. It just kind of goes to places that I to this day are debated between John Negroni and Will Ashton. Included, did she pick the right boy? That kind of thing. I think Will. I don't want to give away your thoughts on that.
Well,
and I think yeah. Go ahead.
I do think that John Ambrose was the way to go, and who am I to tell a young woman what she needs to do? But I mean, I think that was the better direction, in my opinion.
Which I don't understand, because Will Ashton has conceded on this very show that Noah Centineo's smile is enough to give a teenage Peter Parker radioactive spider powers. It's that powerful. Regardless, the second movie, of course, is just kind of a continuation of their love story. The third film, I think, is actually a bit better. So it actually kicks things off with we're kind of in the senior year, the spring of the senior year of our main characters, and Lara Jean and Peter are going strong, but there's a big wide world out there, and there's plenty of movies that are about what happens with the high school sweetheart relationship when they got to go off to college, and we find out there is a plan for them to go to the same school, but Lara Jean's kind of wondering, is that the right choice? Should I be, going to this school just because the boy is over here? Should I be going on a different adventure? And I actually found something kind of warm and satisfying about that direction of the story. One that I actually did feel like was a good progression from the first one, whereas the second one I feel like was just kind of stalling for time, almost, of like, drawing out this love story to a weird degree. What did you think though, Will Ashton?
Well, I'm the opposite on you on the second film in that I think the second one is a noted upgrade from the first film, with the exception
Nonsense.
with the exception that I think the first film is the best directed of these. Like, I don't think the direction is necessarily poor in the second or third film, but it's not quite as strong or not quite as inspired, I think, as the first movie comparatively. But otherwise, I think the second movie has a little bit more developed stakes. Like, I think the relationships are a little bit more interesting there. It kind of avoids some of the formulas while also playing to some others that I think are amusing. But then again, I have to think back on when I saw the second film, and that one I had the chance to see in theaters with an audience. And, I got to see, everyone kind of getting sucked into it and getting taken by the romance of it. And I am wondering, even though these are, like you said, like kind of comfort food films for Netflix in a good way, that I am wondering if they are kind of meant to be for an audience. Like, you're kind of supposed to be watching these with a bunch of people and getting sucked into them. But I don't know. I mean, I can only speak for the experiences I had. But I will say that this movie, I think, similar to you, like I was a little put off at first the beginning because, like you were suggesting, like this is probably the first time where a trilogy capper has the least amount of stakes in a trilogy. Like this third film, it's mostly pretty grounded. Like it's established that Peter and Laura Jean are pretty settled in their relationship. It's not so much a matter of will they, but rather are they willing to go the extra mile or extra several miles to cement the relationship with long distance. Which I think, at first I was kind of like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it just doesn't really seem as interesting to me to follow that part of their relationship. But I agree with you that I think once I settled into its groove and kind of got along with it, I was willing to indulge the film and I think get sucked into it because it is a lot more grounded, a lot more character focused, and it's not quite as playing into some of the contrived stuff that we saw in the first two films. Not to say that it's not without some of that stuff, but I think it's willing to avoid some of those trappings to be a lot more about their central relationship and just kind of focus on their performances and, like you said, kind of developing some sense of finality to it that doesn't feel as extensive or trying to like kind of route this out for another film or two. And I think by the end, I think most of these movies, or I guess all of them, are about the same level in terms of like quality, but I think this one I like a little bit more than the first, but not as much as the second one. But by and large, I think they're all pretty decent films, and they're not my favorite trilogy by any stretch of the imagination. But I think what they're able to do, they do well, and that's I think primarily thanks to the lead performance from, I forget the actress's name, but
Lana Condor.
Lara Condor, and I think she's really the key to these movies working because her performance is so bubbly and endearing and personable in a way that I think is able to help gloss over some of the shortcomings of the storytelling and make this character feel fully fleshed out and someone you want to root for despite kind of the low stakes that are happening with her character. But yeah, I mean, I think it's fine for what it is. That's pretty much where I land on by and large.
I think, first of all, that it's kind of amusing, going to break the fourth wall here, that like Abby is sitting here as these two hopeless romantic dudes are like arguing about a romantic comedy.
I mean, I wasn't going to say anything, but yes, it is a little odd, but that's okay. You do you.
Hey, I mean, but that is kind of indicative of like what I think is really nice about these films is the fact that like while we were like Will and I were kind of watching this at the same time because friendship goals, but it was one of those things where we're literally like arguing and like we're so invested in these characters. Like I'm putting into Google, it's like, okay, but if she goes to this school, like it's not that long of a drive, okay, like without traffic she can get there. Like it's silly stuff like that I think is what endears me the most to this, that I feel like that connection. I think it is because of Lana Condor's performance, but also just the direction of this thing. It doesn't infuse or it doesn't force like high stakes into it, but it instead introduces, like Will said, like the seemingly low stakes of like, okay, well, will this work long distance, and like, are they going to get what they want? But then it adds like some actual layers to it. I think those layers come in the form of, we see that like so far, Peter Kavinsky has been kind of a perfect boyfriend character. He's endlessly supportive, and it hasn't examined too many of his flaws, which I found, that was one of my main criticisms in the second film, is like, it's almost like the films are too scared to make him, because he's so likable. It's like they don't want him to be too much of a jagoff. But then in this film, there's this new complexity added of like, there actually is a flaw to how supportive he is. There is a drawback to that, and that's his he has abandonment issues, and we learn a little bit more of like how some of his family life actually does speak to why he is so loyal, why he is so supportive, and how that can actually create a toxic aspect of this relationship that could poison it. And I when I was watching the film and that happened, I was like, man, this is a lot more insightful than I was expecting. I was kind of thinking this would be sort of like a victory laps movie that's like, we're just going to really cover the fact that people really like these movies, isn't that fun, and then just have a big party of a movie and that's it. But instead, they actually took a few interesting risks. I mean, it's not a risky movie overall, but I still found myself pretty entertained and moved by these crazy kids and what they're gonna do next. I gotta say, I think this is a really good trilogy, and I think you're right, Will, that it's all three films are pretty similar in quality. So that's it. That's my full take on this film. I mean, I'm just gonna put my grade out there. I am a solid B, like I'm a high B minus. I think the first film B, second film solid B minus, third film high B minus. They're all kind of in the same little zone though.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think moved is a word that came to mind for me, but I do think, like you said, there is something weirdly kind of gratifying about being invested in this relationship that feels, at this point, fairly lived in and sincere. And I do think that while people give Noah, is it Cento, or how do you pronounce it? Centineo. I think people give him a lot of gruff because he plays kind of the same character in a bunch of things. Admittedly, I haven't seen his other movies outside of this, I think, except for Charlie's Angels, but
Perfect Date is the other one that I think
I didn't see that one
too.
Right. But I will say, I mean, like, I don't think he's an amazing actor or anything, but I think of the three films, this is probably his best performance. And I think it's partly because, like you said, he's given a little bit more grounded stakes. His character's a little bit more fleshed out beyond just being like the, almost comically perfect boyfriend at times, to the point where like he does kind of feel like this like plush toy of a man that's just like going around and like just trying to be hugged and all this stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, like the stuff that works.
Plush toy of a man is like the perfect description.
You like that
one? Sorry, that was really inspired. Well done.
Well, thank you. But like I said, I think it's not so much that it's doing a lot better. It's just that I think what works is carried over here enough, and they're willing to be a little bit more risk taking in terms of allowing the characters to be a little bit more authentic and have some kind of jagged edges here that make the relationship seem a little bit more sincere by this point in the trilogy. But yeah, I mean, I think if we're rating all the films, like I think the first one was like a low B minus for me. The second one was a high B minus, and this one's a pretty comfortable B minus. Like I think they're all about the same in terms of quality, like I said, but I think this one, I was agreeable with it. I think what works about it, I was endeared to, but I don't think these movies are really doing much that stand out compared to the other. But I think compared to, like, from what I've heard, like the Kissing Booth movies, like this is a little bit more wholesome and endearing. Like I've heard those ones and some of the other ones that are meant to appeal to the same audience don't quite work for the same reason.
Those films just aren't sanitary, if you ask me.
I mean, especially in COVID times. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it's fine. Like I said, I don't think I'm going to be thinking back on this trilogy a lot, but I enjoyed my time with them. And like I said, I think it is fun to get a little bit invested in these like kind of, endearing teenagers who just want to do right by each other and want to have a relationship against the odds. And, who am I to stop them? I hope things work out. I don't think it will, but, maybe it will.
Honest.
Yeah. You think it's going to work out for them after this?
I don't really care. I don't think that's the point. It's. I think the point is that they, they're going to do what's right for them, and they're going to support each other whether they're together or apart. And I feel like Abby is just like, what
this is adorable. I'm loving this. We're recording this on Valentine's Day, so this is all very appropriate conversation.
Absolutely.
I just think it's funny that you're just like, oh, I really like this. I'm really invested. And then when I ask you if you care if they get together or stay together, you're just, whatever.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
I care more about them individually, the fictional characters, than I do them as a couple. I don't think they need to be together to be happy necessarily. And I think that is one of the points of the movie I think they could have made better, actually. But regardless, that's why I'm like a B minus on it, not like a B. But
Likewise, yeah.
Great Valentine's Day movie. Great soundtrack as usual. I mean, I did joke with Will a little bit off the air about how like this movie is constantly playing music.
Yeah.
Like there's literally like a subplot about them finding their song. There's like music when she's walking upstairs. There's music when like just the most mundane things are happening. But at least the music itself is pretty good. So I'm not gonna lie. I was saving some songs to library. I'll put it out there.
You adding some Oasis to your Spotify playlist after this?
You know what? I was really nervous that was going to be a really cringe-worthy choice, like which Oasis song she's going to play, and I was like, okay, that's okay.
Which one is it? That's important. It's important to me.
It wasn't Wonderwall.
That's good.
It wasn't Wonderwall. It was I think the first song. I forget the name of it. It's the first song in that album, I think, which is always gets overlooked. So that's why I was kind of like, okay, and it makes sense. It's the first song she plays in the playlist. So there you go.
That's I can get behind that.
To All the Boys, Always and Forever is now available to stream on Netflix. And I think it's definitely a recommendation. If you like the first two movies, you know what the deal is. If you watch the first one and you're like Abby and you're like, whatever, it may not be worth like seeking out necessarily, but I don't think people will be disappointed overall. And also the film's not too long. It's a little under 2 hours. But let's move on to our next film. So Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar. Abby, you have been very patient. You had to sit through our entire To All the Boys review, which I'm sure was excruciating. So for this one, for Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar, let's hear it. Set this one up for us. And what's the deal with this movie? What is this thing?
Absolutely. So there's a lot more going on than the marketing suggests, as we've mentioned before. So Barb and Star are best friends. They're played by Annie Mumolo, who co-wrote the script with Kristen Wiig, who plays Star. And they also both worked on the script for Bridesmaids. They've worked together for a long time. So I think their friendship and partnership in real life maybe partially mirrors that of Barb and Star in the film, which is part of what makes it so good. But I digress. Barb and Star are lifelong best friends who live in the small town of Soft Rock, Nebraska, and they have jobs at the hottest spot in town, the Jennifer Convertible's home showroom. And when that store closes down, they are given a severance package and decide that they are going to go on a vacation to Vista Del Mar, Florida, where a friend has recently been on vacation and came back looking like a changed woman. So they are going to go to this magical, wonderful place where everybody is friendly and all the men are attractive and they all dress in Tommy Bahama head to toe. That is an actual line from this wonderful gem of a movie. So they go to Vista Del Mar and kind of try to get their groove back. And at the same time, a spy played by Jamie Dornan is there carrying out a kind of dastardly plan on behalf of his albino boss, also played by Kristen Wiig, who he is in kind of a one-sided relationship with. He wants to be an official couple, and she just kind of keeps stringing him along to get him to do what she wants. He and Barb and Star...
But enough about To All the Boys I Loved Before.
Oh, snap. Wow, that was cold. But the three of them eventually meet up, and some romantic rivalry between Barb and Star briefly ensues, but mostly it's about the threat that poses to their friendship, as well as kind of what it looks like to have a healthy romantic relationship in your older years. But anyway, all that aside, Barb and Star is a bizarro, wonderful, tropical blue delight of a movie. And I loved every second of it. Maybe not everybody will, but I thought it was great.
Yeah, we were talking about how for Valentine's Day, it's like, why release this movie here? On the one hand, I really wish this movie had come out in like July because it's such a summer movie. On the other hand, this is way more of a Valentine's Day movie because it covers both aspects of Valentine's Day that I appreciate the most, which is, the obvious, like more romantic, heteronormative relationship stuff or homosexual relationship, whatever. But they don't have that in this film. But then also like Galentine's Day. This is like an ideal Galentine's Day movie, I would say. But yeah, I'm a fan. What did you think of Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar, Will Ashton? And do you have any rhymes to add to the title?
I'll see if I can. But yeah, I mean, similar to Abby, I think going into this movie with, I think, fairly modest expectations was best. Like, admittedly, I'd heard from this past week that people were really digging it or liking it, but I was still kind of like, I don't know, like, just from that first teaser, I was just like, this just seems like an odd sort of thing. I'm not like the biggest Kristen Wiig fan. I like Bridesmaids, I like MacGruber a lot, and I like Skeleton Twins, but I don't remember seeing anything fairly recently with her that really impressed me outside of like SNL. So I was a little concerned about that as well. But I agree. This is like basically a blank check film. Like they basically had 10 years from Bridesmaids to kind of do like one project that was another kind of mid-budget thing where they could basically do what they want. And it feels like they took like pretty much every liberty they could, just make a very odd, very bizarre kind of I don't want to say high concept comedy, because like we're saying, it's basically just about friends going on a vacation and just kind of wacky things ensue from there. But there's so many jokes in here that are inspired in just how silly and ludicrous they are in a way that feels very unabashed. Like, it's just so willing to be like, look, this is what we're doing. If you want that, have fun. If you're not going to dig this, we're sorry. But it's very true to itself. I think it has this kind of like Austin Powers by way of like Wayne's World kind of vibe to it, like kind of a mix of the two in terms of like tone and silliness. But yeah, I mean, it feels like a like 90s SNL movie that came from like another dimension, like 2 or 3 decades later, and it's just like now in our timeline, and we're kind of just left with it in a good way, in that like it's such a bizarre little oddity that you kind of have to like decompress a few times, and I hope that means rewarding rewatches. But yeah, I mean, I think even beyond just the like inspired kookiness of it, the core chemistry between our two leads is just very strong. Like Abby was saying, very palpable by the fact that they are actual friends and collaborators, and it doesn't feel insincere in that respect. And I can see some people may be annoyed by like kind of the like cutesy silliness of it, but I don't know. I was in the right vibe with it for most of it, and by and large, I was pretty surprised by how much I was won over by this silly little movie.
Yeah, so we should mention the director of this film is Josh Greenbaum, who has done a few documentaries. Most of them are like kind of all over the place. Like, they're not really what you would expect. Like, he did like a James Bond documentary at one point. He's done some like TV stuff, like some sports, Behind the Mask.
He did the Dana Carvey show documentary, I think, right?
He did, yeah. And he's also done like some TV work too. I think he's directed episodes of New Girl. But I think the thing that I think is probably most closely related to this is he did a Funny or Die documentary once, the Clinton Foundation one, which feels a little bit more in line, because otherwise you would be like, this seems kind of random that he'd be doing something like this at this point in his career, because he hasn't done a ton of narrative work outside of TV. But that said, I think after watching this film especially, and I don't know how much of it too is like Wiig and Mumalo's like script really dictating like the insanity of this film, but I do also enjoy, like, as a director, how he just sort of let them make this, almost feels like they really like put this film out there, and he enabled all of that as director and didn't get in the way, which is great. Particularly with man, I love Damon Wayans Jr. in this film and Jamie Dornan, because as the guys in the film, like the main guys, they have like such a hard job of like, they have such powerhouse comedic actors who are like, who so easily could have taken this away from like anybody else in the film. But what I really enjoy of, like, despite Kristen Wiig is like 2 really great characters, Annie Mumalo is like unbelievably funny here, and then somehow Jamie Dornan is able to come in and kind of do his own thing. He doesn't outshine them by any stretch, but he gets his own sort of like really sincere character that he fully commits to. And then Damon Wayans Jr. has kind of a bit role that like should not be funny the 3rd time. And especially the 4th, 5th, and 6th time, but it somehow still is, and it's so indicative of how like endlessly creative they were with these characters. And man, I needed to see this film. But this was my debut review for Awards Watch, and I said this is kind of like the vacation film that we need right now. It's kind of hard watching this film, as like my family lives in Florida, so like, I like going to Florida, to visit, and just sort of like spending some time there. The area is different, right? Like, there's definitely a fun atmosphere. There's a vacation sense of mind that I was kind of craving, because I get that when I get to visit my family, and I haven't gone to visit them in a long time for obvious reasons. And this film was a really nice escape, especially since I feel like we haven't gotten the funniest kind of like studio comedies lately. Like, the funnier movies we've been getting have been, kind of like lower budget films, although I don't know what the budget for this is. I imagine it's not big, but it definitely feels like a film that they really were expecting to be a little bit bigger than it was. This is Lionsgate, by the way. But and also I will say I do really appreciate the Austin Powers stuff with Kristen Wiig's villainous character, and just the fact that like Dr. Lady I thought was a more intriguing and powerful villain than Sheeta from Wonder Woman 1984. I don't know if that says more about this film or Wonder Woman 1984, but there you go. But yeah, Abby, what do you think? It sounds like you like this one quite a bit. What is it about the comedy here that you think really stands out?
Oh man, I think the timing of it is a big deal. Like I watched this on Tuesday night after a long day. It was super dreary out. It's still really dreary out, and like it's so bright and funny and uncynical and loving in terms of all of its characters. I think that's another thing about it that I really like, is that it is even the villains, even the bad guys, like it's willing to poke fun at the things that make them ridiculous, but it's never mean. It's never cynical. Like this movie clearly loves everybody in it. And that is, it's such a fun and lovely vibe when that's not the way that the world feels right now. I keep thinking back to like individual bits in that movie that were just so fun and surprising. And like, they still make me laugh and they still make me smile. Like I realized after finishing watching that, like, I'm going to have to watch at least a couple other movies this week. And I'm going to wish every single time that I was watching Barb and Star instead, just because it made me feel so good. It's like there are some insane jokes that come out of nowhere. There are also just great running bits that are really lovingly understanding of like the details of middle-aged momcore life. I loved every single culotte joke. They were all on point. I loved that there's a moment where the central three, where Barb and Star and Jamie Dornan's character Edgar get just wildly drunk and high and dance to like a club version of Celine Dion. That's delightful. There are just all kinds of wonderful, weird choices that I think work for the kinds of people that they are, like the kinds of characters that are in this movie, but also just people who like weird and strange comedy. Like I agree with what Will said. This feels like very much like a really good version of a 90s SNL based kind of movie filtered through like maybe a Lonely Island lens. And I like, as somebody who likes both of those things, this feels like a lovely marriage of the two.
Yeah, I was surprised. I was like, is this like an SNL sketch that I've never seen? Is that where these characters come from? And nope. Also, these women, like especially Annie Mumolo's character, Barb, she's my aunt. Like she looks like my aunt. They have like the same personality, and I miss my aunt a lot. She's also in Florida. And I wanted to tell her, like, you should see this movie, but then I was like, thinking back to like everything that happens, I was like, maybe not. But regardless, I thought that it was very, very lovely. Like she even has the coiffed hair. I'm just saying. I don't know if she wears culottes, but
does she make hot dog soup?
Yeah, not hot dog soup, but she does. She would make me like, hot dog stuff. Like she'd make me like a hamburger kind of soup.
Excellent.
Yeah, her cooking wasn't the best. I'm not gonna.
It's not as runny as it usually is.
Yeah. Oh man, the flashback to the hot dog soup. But yeah, Will, I understand. Like this is a very weird, inaccessible film. Do you think it can be too inaccessible for people? I know we've kind of talked about that a little bit, but I don't know. How are you feeling about it as like a film that's like? Do you think it's going to find its audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's deliberately not trying to be everything for everyone. Like I think it much rather wants to be its own weird little thing, which I admire. I think it's better off for that. I don't know how wide of an audience it's going to get because I just don't know how many people find this as funny as we do. But I will say, I mean, it did kind of remind me of like, I was wondering because I didn't really like what was the Will Ferrell thing from last year, Eurovision Song Contest. I didn't really care for that film, but I know it found an audience. It found an audience because it has kind of a similar vibe, and it came out around like this time last year, and that like it was a kind of depressing time, and people wanted something that was like goofy and silly, and was able to appeal to that audience when they needed something like that. And I think that might be beneficial for this film for that reason. But I don't really know exactly how wide of an audience it's going to be. But like I said, I think the fact that it is fairly true to itself and that it is willing to just be whatever weird thing it wants to be at any given time and fire on all cylinders and just kind of indulge its own sensibilities and instead of following anything that other audiences might want from this, I guess, is I think for the better. But in the end of the day, I don't really know how wide of an audience is going to be the answer to your question. But I am curious to know, like, sorry, what?
I'll say real quick then, I think that it has something to do with, which streaming service will get this. And I think it's probably between, I know Lionsgate has deals with both Hulu and Amazon. Particularly, like, I think they could put this through like Stars, but I think that has a lot to do with it. I think if it's on like Hulu, I don't know how many people will see it. I wish that it was like Eurovision and it could be on something that everybody like watches, like Netflix, even though I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the filmmakers' other films are on Netflix, on Hulu, from what I can tell. So it makes sense to put it on Hulu, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think either of them would do fine. I think it would find an audience that way, but my guess would be Hulu, but who knows?
I could see it getting lost on Amazon in a way that it might not on Hulu. It could be a little easier to feature. Sometimes Amazon has such a huge glut of content that, I don't know, there's a potential that it might not get seen as readily, but I hope it gets on streaming soon.
Yeah, I feel like we're still kind of figuring out like what is, because it seems like not everything on Amazon really takes off. The things on Amazon that take off seems to be like their more original series, like things like The Boys and Hunters, Man in the High Castle. Whereas like Hulu, I feel like, what is the thing that really takes off there that people really talk about? Is it the movies? Is it the documentaries that they do? I don't know. I don't really know one way or the other.
Yeah, I also am, and like I tend to be siloed in my weird little cult stuff. I think that this probably will find an audience, probably not a wide one, but a pretty dedicated one. I would imagine that the same folks on the film Twitter verse who love stuff like Popstar and MacGruber, which did not do well in theaters, but have since found a really dedicated cult following, are going to be fans of this. And I would not be surprised if that was kind of the ultimate fate of Barb and Star as well. I hope it's not. I hope it does better than that, but I imagine that's probably closer to the truth.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of getting to what I was trying to say before, is that like it feels like we kind of missed a step where like the movie underperformed in theaters. So I don't know if it's better or worse that it didn't go to theaters, because I think visually it's a lot more inspired and a lot more creative, especially like all the sets and stuff. I think I would certainly rather see this movie in theaters in terms of like studio comedies than a lot of the other ones that we missed out on. But at the same time, yeah, I have to wonder if like, would this have just underperformed and that give Lionsgate less confidence in it, or the fact that it's available on VOD right now, and it's probably going to be a little bit more approachable to some people, with the exception of the $20 asking price, which I still think is pretty absurd, but that's a whole other discussion.
That's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think it's for the better that this is getting out, like you said, on Valentine's Day, and it's available digitally. So I think the audience that this was intended for probably find it a little bit easier than would have in theaters, where I think the marketing and just the fact that the movie, like Lionsgate really didn't know how to sell this, which is understandable because I don't know how I would sell it either. It did kind of feel like it missed that step where it underperformed in theaters. And I guess by and large, it's for the better, but also kind of disappointing at the same time.
All right, let's get into our final thoughts then and grade this thing. I enjoyed this quite a bit. I think it's hilarious. I don't want to say too much, just because the thing that I like about it is that it does kind of slowly suck you in. I didn't mention this before, but I think like the first 10, 20 minutes aren't the strongest, which I liked, because it kind of like eases you into the weirdness. It doesn't have like that big tone setting. I mean, it kind of does with like the evil lair stuff, but it's not the funniest part of the movie by any means. I think what I like about it is that it takes a lot of time to get you to really like Barb and Star. And it takes its time to really like establish like their friendship. And then you get to the point where it's like, man, I hope they have a nice vacation. Then the really weird stuff starts to creep in. And then it's almost like it's getting you on the wavelength, easing you into it, instead of just like, just pounding tons of weirdness at you. And I think that's for the best. It worked for me, obviously, because I was a little unsure early on. I was like, I don't know, this doesn't seem as funny as like people were making it out to seem. But then it's just the jokes per minute just started to like ramp up and get better. And that's something that comedies tend to not be great at. Sometimes they front load, sometimes they have sections that are funnier than others. And then this was a pretty consistent stream of comedy. And then up until the final moment, I think that it really nails it. So yeah, I'm a big old B+ on Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar. I hope they go back soon for a sequel. What about you, Abiel Chessie?
I'm a little higher. I'm an A-, mostly just because, this hit at the right time. It provided exactly the things that I needed it to. By the end of the movie, my face hurt from laughing and smiling so much, and I have consistently thought about it and how much I loved it and enjoyed it throughout the week. I probably will. I mean, I'm already debating whether or not I'm going to spring $20 to watch it again. I liked it that much. It's super weird and funny and sweet, and it's full of unexpected fun that I don't want to ruin for people. I agree, John, that it starts a little bit slow, but once it hits like the 20-25 minute mark, stuff starts to get weird real fast, and it gets weird in a fun way that I think it still makes sense for like the structure of the plot too. I think all of it kind of connects, even when stuff feels like it comes out of nowhere. It still connects to like gags that are set up within that first 20 minutes. So it's really tight. I think tighter than maybe some people might initially recognize, just because there is so much weird stuff that comes out of seemingly left field. But yeah, I'm an A- on this. I think this is something that I'm probably going to enjoy in my personal pantheon for a long time to come.
Yeah, I definitely can't wait to rewatch this by introducing it to other people, and I'll probably like it even more the second time, because I felt like I was missing some jokes because I was laughing from other ones. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if my estimation of it just continues to rise as time goes on. And I think it'll probably age pretty well. What about you, Will Ashton? Are you as high as us? Higher? Where are you at?
I don't think I'm quite that high on it, but I did enjoy it a good bit. My only, I guess, point of disagreement is that I think I was sort of the opposite as you, John, in that I really liked the beginning a lot. Like, I think I was really with it for like the first like 40-45 minutes. And then the middle of it was where I kind of started to wane a little bit, because that's where they had to establish some of the more like plot heavy stuff to establish the third act. And I think that's where I started to kind of lose it. But then by the end, I was pretty won over again by it's, like we said, commitment to weirdness and the fact that it was willing to just kind of do whatever it wanted to do at any given point, regardless of logistics or anything that would be in good taste, maybe in other films. But I do think, like we were saying, I think it works so often because it's so consistently willing to just like up the ante and be as absurd as possible, but also be very sincere and sweet and not really have a crude sensibility or anything that might make it seem off-putting or insincere, which I think is really a testament to the two writers and lead actresses here, who are able to kind of communicate that in a way that, with no offense, I think the director here, I think, who does a nice job. It does, like you were saying, John, feel like their movie by and large, and I think it's for the better for that reason. Like I said before, it is like their blank check film after Bridesmaids, and I'm glad they're able to get something like this made from the studio system, because I really miss silly comedies like this on this scale and budget, and it's nice to see something like this again, even though it's not in theaters. But yeah, I'd give it a pretty low but comfortable B. It's a good time, and I'm glad I checked it out.
All right. Well, still pretty solid recommendations from three of us overall. I guess like a B+ average. That said, I think that's I do hope that people find this somehow. It is available to rent on demand, and I'm anxious to see it hopefully get to some place like Hulu where people will discover it for sure. I think that would probably make the most sense. I feel like Palm Springs hit Hulu last year. Also a really funny movie, the Lonely Island one, and I think that did find an audience eventually. So we're hoping for the best over here. But Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar. It's available to watch right now. So we have one last film, and I'm so sorry, Abby, but Will and I have one more romantic film to talk about.
Oh, come on, you guys.
Romantic
Jeez.
teen dramedy.
You're such softies.
Yeah.
What can we say? It's like dad movie, whatever. Chick flick. Let's do it.
Meanwhile, I'm over here getting ready to fire up Master and Commander for like the third or fourth time. So we're switching roles over here.
You know what? That's all right. As Cinemaholics, we're supposed to defy expectations. That's what we do. Regardless, I did really want to check this one out. I had a genuine interest in it, only because it was recommended by Felicia Day, who like went out of her way to be like, "Hey, this thing, it's on Amazon right now," and I just was kind of like, you know what? I trust you, Felicia Day. You're the person that I go to for my film recommendations.
I didn't realize you were in such close connection with Felicia Day, but that's good to know.
I will not make it sound as close connections as you apparently have perceived it. I am a fan lost in a sea of other fans. Let's put it that way.
Sure. I mean, I'm being facetious, but yeah, that's the way you describe it. Just like, he's like, oh yeah, Felicia Day,
Felicia
this very famous actress and writer. You just, we were chatting about these Amazon movies, and this is what came up.
She was like, hey, look, John, I know you got a lot of other films on your plate this week. No, but I genuinely, as soon as I knew that it was kind of I knew it was a sci-fi rom-com. I didn't know like the deal with it, but let's talk about it. So let's talk about The Map of Tiny Perfect Things. This is a sci-fi rom-com temporal anomaly movie. We've got another one on our hands. We just talked about Palm Springs, and this year we have. So if Palm Springs was like Groundhog's Day, but the kind of like nihilistic rom-com version, this is more of like the romantic drama. Actually, this is like the indie YA coming of age teen version that does have comedy in it, but it's more about teenagers falling in love, and maybe learning some things about life, getting out of their small town, life lessons like that. This just came out on Prime Video, and this is another pretty like comfortable Valentine's Day film. It stars Katherine Newton, who I believe is just being perpetually cast in high school roles. I can't wait for a film to allow her to graduate. And also Kyle Allen, who I think might be a newcomer because I had never heard of him, or I didn't really recognize him before seeing this. So I don't know if he's been in other things, but this is a great introduction for him. And so the story is we have this guy who is living out the Groundhog's Day format. It's the middle of the summer. He is in high school. He's supposed to go to summer school, but he doesn't. He just kind of like goes along his life. It's a very chill version of the Groundhog's Day format where he spends his day, like he goes to the library. He, pops in on his friend who plays video games, and it's just kind of like an endless summer, And his main goal though is he just wants to get a girlfriend, but it's so hard to find love in COVID. In temporal anomaly, because he just keeps getting rejected over and over and over again, and he just can't really get close to anybody. It's like rinse, wash, repeat. And so that's kind of how we're introduced to this character. But eventually he discovers there actually is somebody else in this simulation. Somebody else is experiencing the same time loop, and that person is played by Katherine Newton. And together they just sort of like live out their existence, and she's a little bit more guarded. He's clearly smitten, but she kind of keeps him at arm's length. And so he decides maybe something that can kind of create a connection with this person in our little small town is if we can make this map of perfect moments we find in town on this one day of the summer. And I'm just going to say, this is a very effective, charming, and sweet little movie, very unassuming, and I really enjoyed it. So what about you, Will? Did this one warm your cold, steely heart?
It did. No, I liked it. I have a soft spot for time loop movies, I guess with the exception of Palm Springs, which I liked, but not quite as much as you two and a few other critics. But I don't know. There's something about like this premise that it is like very bizarre, and you can have a lot of fun playing with the time loop premise and do something that has a concrete structure, but gives wiggle room to play around and do some cheeky, silly things. And I don't think this one does anything particularly new or inventive in terms of that approach. But I think what works here are the two lead performances from, like I said, Cal Allen and Katherine Newton. Cal Allen, I haven't seen anything from him before, but I think he was on American Horror Story and The Path, the Hulu show, so he does have some TV background. This is the first starring role I think of his. So
okay, I just missed him.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I haven't seen anything from him before this, so this is my first exposure to him as well. But I think they have a really solid chemistry in here. It doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel insincere outside of the kind of plot conventions and stuff like that. But I do think they have a kind of nice meet cute little thing going on, and they're able to communicate a nice kind of friendly, semi-romantic relationship that is very fun and playful, but also there are some kind of bubbling sincerities to it that I think are credit to the two performers here, especially Katherine Newton, who, like you said, in a kind of ironic fashion is being held back by these like kind of high school roles, being perpetually playing these type of roles. But I am excited to see her do more leading role stuff. We also saw her in Freaky a few months ago, and I think she's really proving herself to be a pretty versatile actress who's able to do a lot of different genres and tones really well. And this is no exception. And yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a lot to this that is, especially unique or anything that would make it better than some of the other time loop movies we've gotten recently. But I think what it does well, it does pretty well. And I had a good time throughout.
Yeah, I think the reason this one sticks out to me a little bit more than I guess I was expecting is just because, first of all, I didn't know it was a time loop movie until it started. And, it kind of went through its thing. I was like, oh, okay, a time loop movie. Sure, why not? And I think my worry about it was that it was going to be, kind of like some other films I've been hearing that are YA coming of age, like Ultimate Playlist of Noise, last year's like All the Bright Places, like these films where teens are just going through it. They have all of these big pressing social issues like climate change and, which is brought up in this film about how like, the youth these days don't feel confident about their future because they're being handed like a list of, really awful crises.
Yeah, like Spontaneous too.
Yeah, Spontaneous is a great example of that. Yeah. And what I like about this film, though, is that it really rounds out a lot of that like hopelessness with, I thought, some interesting commentary on, okay, like what is it like in this day and age to feel like you're stuck in your town, to feel like you're an outsider, you're kind of like a castaway at one point they refer to, and it feels like the one person you want to connect to just isn't really there. And I think to what you were saying before, one of the reasons they work as characters who come together is because they aren't just romantic foils. I think that there's a case to be made that there's something platonic that really draws them together as well. So you don't feel like there is some sort of like insincerity from Catherine Newton, who is clearly resisting like intimacy. There actually does seem to be a pretty grounded reason for, her motivations. And, I think that the difference in their personality is also a little bit more against type than you would expect. Particularly, he's very artistic, but, he's not the stereotypical artistic kid. He's not dramatic. He's not trying to be Timothée Chalamet. There's not this like weird, he just feels like a kind of a normal kid who's really good at drawing, who doesn't have the biggest ambitions, but he's just kind of like trying to get by. And like, he felt like a high schooler to me. And I thought with the same thing with Catherine Newton's character, I think that she feels like somebody in this moment in time who is trapped but wants to be trapped almost. And I don't know, I thought something about their dynamic was, it's not the most original thing in the world, but I think that it's more interesting in how it's written. It's fresher in how it is like, kind of like coming together than anything else. So yeah, I was surprised that there was this much to chew on with this movie. And I think some people will watch it and that stuff will probably not really register with them because they're not looking for it or because it's just hitting me in a different way. But no, I was kind of affected by what this film was trying to say. And I appreciate this sort of like the synergy of the metaphors here. I actually think it's elegantly done. And it's the same kind of thing I was saying for Palm Springs. They're finding really good connective ways of like making the time loop genre become, something bigger than Groundhog's Day. This is one of those films that references other time loop films, which I don't mind. I know, Will, you don't love that as much, but I think there's an argument to be made on one side of like, we're getting too many of these. There have been a lot in the last decade. And then there's another side of this that's saying, well, say again?
I said, speak for yourself.
Oh, in terms of we're getting too many of these,
yeah,
I'm not saying that as my opinion. I'm saying that as like I know a lot of people who hate this. There are critics I really appreciate who are like, I just don't want this type of movie to be made anymore because I'm sick of it. And then there's this other side which I am more favorable to, which is that this is becoming a subgenre, more of a subgenre unto itself. It isn't just sort of like ripping off a premise at this point. I do think it is its own genre, and I think that it's perfectly acceptable for other films to do something with it. And I think that they're doing creative things with it, like you were saying. Well, not the most creative things with it, but creative nonetheless. So, what do you think, though? Do you think that this is do you think all that works for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think like you're saying, like I think we're getting to the point now where we're not just doing Groundhog's Day all over again. It still is to an extent, but I think we're starting to move past that. We're kind of getting a little bit deeper in terms of like what we can do with a time loop type movie. And I don't think we're fully there. Like it does kind of seem to be stuck in a rudder, I guess, fittingly. But I do think, like you said, like there's room for kind of interesting ideas to be explored therein. And I mean, I don't think what this movie is doing is particularly deep in terms of like, recognizing the little things in life that you can appreciate. Like, I mean, that's something that I think a lot of people already have seen in other films. And I think the execution of it is what's key here. Like we said, the performances work, and I think there is a palpable chemistry there that feels pretty honest, and the characters feel pretty well lived in and sincere in that way. But the screenplay as well, I believe Lev Grossman is a novelist and I think a former book critic, if I recall reading that correctly. So he comes in with a different background. He approaches
this
material.
Is based on a short story, and so Lev Grossman wrote the short story and then also did the screenplay.
But I think there's like a little bit more interest in terms of like fleshing out these characters in a way that maybe other films would just kind of settle for different things. Whereas I think the screenplay is a little bit more interested in being a little bit more enriched in a certain way and having a little bit more depth to these characters while not being overly complex or slowing the film down in any way. Because there is a particular pacing to this film that I think is pretty commendable in terms of, communicating a good number of things, but not having to slow down the film in order to say those things. But like we said, like I don't think this is doing anything particularly noteworthy outside of that. But that's not to say that this movie needs to do all that much to work. I think it's appealing enough on its own, and especially as a streaming release, I think it works. But it's not one I think I'm going to be thinking about revisiting a lot later on. But for the time I had watching it, I had a good time.
Same here. I'm a low but confident B on this movie. I think that it is pretty effective, and I find myself kind of, not anxious to recommend it, but like I do think it's the kind of film that I feel comfortable recommending to people as they're sort of asking. People I know who do like these kinds of films, I think that they'll, if you're keen on this type of drama and this type of like schmaltzy romance that, like you're saying, is not that noteworthy in other ways, I think there's a lot to appreciate here. So I think that in that sense, it's a good crowd pleaser kind of film. And I hope it does great things for both of the lead actors. I think that like Catherine Newton's already on an ascent, and she just, I think is like one breakout role away from really taking off in her career. But I like Kyle Allen in this. I think that he does a good job. He really holds his own, and I'd like to see more of him, in a lot of other work. I could see him being really prominent on even more TV stuff, in fact. So yeah, solid B for me.
Yeah, I'm not too far from where you are. I think I'd give it a high B- overall, just because, like I said, I don't think this is one that really breaks the mold or does too much that makes it stand out compared to other time loop movies. And when I think back on stuff like Happy Death Day and Palm Springs and stuff like that, I think I like those movies just a little bit more in this one overall. But that's not to say that this is doing anything poor or wrong. If anything, maybe if we hadn't gotten those type of films, I might have gotten a little bit more out of this, but I can't really say for sure. But like we said, I think we're getting to this point now where it is basically a genre in and of itself. And I don't know if that means we're going to get more movies that just kind of do a similar thing in different genres, or if we're actually going to get a little bit meatier in terms of the approach. But I'm definitely down. Like I said, I like time loop movies a lot, and I enjoy these type of high concept romances. So I'm down for it. Whatever happens, I'm here for it.
Yeah, I think we've gotten like the action of this, the like I guess action and war. We've gotten horror. We haven't gotten like supernatural horror, like a haunted house time loop movie. I'd kind of like to see that. That could be fun. So Abby, we've obviously talked about this movie quite a bit. I'm sure you've already written down, some notes on like why you probably won't check it out. But if I could sway you, in case you need to be swayed, Josh Hamilton from 8th grade does play the dad in this.
I did see that, and that was appealing to me. So that might be the thing that does it. Is it significant? Is he around?
To see it.
It's not the reason to see it.
Yeah, because he's not in it that much. But I'm not going to oversell it. I don't want you to be disappointed. But he
doesn't give his son a heartfelt speech.
He does.
Yeah, no,
he does.
He does, but it doesn't go the way you might think. So,
okay,
you may have to report back to us on that one.
Okay, I'm there. I'm into it.
Take it. I just love Josh Hamilton. He's just such an affable guy.
Yeah.
Wish he was. I love my dad, but I wish he was my dad. If I could have two dads, I'd ask Josh Hamilton. But there you go.
Win a dad with Josh Hamilton.
Oh, that's a good. Wow. Good reference.
That's fun.
I appreciate that. I accept it fully. But okay, that'll do it for our show. Thank you everybody for listening. And I did forget to say, although I did say at the outset, Map of Tiny Perfect Things is available to watch right now on Amazon Studios, and it's only an hour 39 minutes. But yeah, it's time to close out the show. Next week, we are going to talk about Minari, Land, and a few other things, a few other interesting releases. And we won't talk about Nomadland since we did already have a discussion. It's hitting a wider release, but I think we already talked about it a couple months back, so you can find that review in the archives. But before we go, Abigail Chessie, is there anything you're working on that you'd like to plug for us this week?
Sure. I will have a feature out on Think Christian about movies to watch during Lent, if that is a thing that you are wanting to observe. And if you want to observe it with movies, that's a pretty good hookup. I'm also on the Think Christian podcast this week talking about 2 movies, The Night of the Hunter, which probably comes as no surprise to anybody who's met me ever, and The Velocipaster, which might. It's great. I like them both. So yeah, that's me.
2 very similar films, I have to say.
Oh, very. Yeah. There's a surprising amount of overlap.
All right. What about you, Will? Anything going on this week you want to let the listeners know about?
That I not to harp on this before, but that just made me realize I've seen Velocipaster, but I haven't seen Night of the Hunter, which I think is a Will Ashton problem. But
that's okay. My buddy JR had not seen it yet either before we did the podcast, so there's plenty of time to rectify that.
Sure. But yeah, I mean, I just wrote a review of Land not too long ago. That's on the Cinemaholics site right now if you want to check that out. Before our conversation about next week, I wrote up my thoughts there, and hopefully have some more Sundance stuff coming shortly. So look out for that. Sounds great.
I'm going to be on the Global Film Podcast this week with Diego Andaluz, and I think somebody else is going to be on the show, but I'm not sure yet. We're going to be talking about Minari and I Care a Lot, and I think also Nomadland. So yeah, keep your ears peeled for that. If you don't know, it's called Global Film Podcast. You can check that out. Really great show. Diego's awesome. And I've also got a bunch of reviews out this week. I mentioned my Barb and Star one that came out on Awards Watch. Really excited to start writing for them. I've also got a review of Bliss. So if you're curious why I really did not like that film, you can find my review for that on the Spool. I wrote a review of Land as well on the Young Folks, along with Judas, my review of Judas and the Black Messiah. Lots of reviews this week. My goodness. Need to take a little bit of a break, but yeah, good productive week. Let's finish out this weird first half of February that is just like tons and tons of movies, and then I feel like we're gonna get to a week where we're gonna miss these days when we had a lot to choose from. It's like a spoil of riches almost. But yeah, so we'll see you all next week from the Internet California. I am John Agroni.
For the Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Will Ashton.
From the Internet Kansas City, I'm Abigail Chessie.
See you next time.